Yes, I can see Dr. Manoj Joshi is there, my friend from Iceland. Excellency, how are you? Nice to see you. And
Likewise, nice to see you as well, Sundar.
yeah, Y.K. Sinha is there. Manoj Bharti, how are you? Ready to Jakarta? Okay.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you very much. Yes.
Good evening. Let's get some other panelists we have.
Hi, Surinder. Good evening.
Hi, how are you?
Alhamdulillah.
Yes, let's see Professor Raja Mohan from Singapore.
Good evening, Ambassador Kumar.
How are you? Professor, are you there? Professor Raja Mohan, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I think you should tell everyone to.
Yeah, put our audio on the mute. I have done all the on mute. Is Suhasini there? Suhasini Haidar.
I'm here. Good evening.
Okay, you are there. So we have Suhasini, we have Manoj, we have Professor Raja Mohan. And then I think we can get going. Let us wait for one more minute. Okay, how is Singapore, Professor Raja Mohan?
Yeah, Singapore is fine. Singapore is nice, safe bubble out here. So,
Okay, waiting for Ambassador from Indonesia.
there he is.
Ambassador Sidharto, Suryodipuro, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Ambassador Kumar.
Okay, good evening to everybody. I think all of our panel is here. When we start speaking, we will see there. So welcome to you all for this another session of virtual discussion, which we are making to in the absence of getting the regular halls. Now we have chosen a topic which is of great interest. You keep on reading about it in the newspaper every day, and we have most knowledgeable panel who have been studying this area for a long time. So I will not preempt whatever they are going to say. In my view is that we have a lot of rhetoric going around, and we must take a statement with a pinch of salt. Because if you go by the American statement, then you will see totally different. Sitting in Singapore, your different perspective. And I'm sure Ambassador from Jakarta, you totally different view. So Indians have their own views. So we have to balance all this and see what is the best interest of India, best interest of ASEAN group, or rest of it. So as I had mentioned earlier, Ambassador, I will request you to do the honor of initiating discussion. But before I do that, I will say a few words about you for the benefit of those who might have not known. Ambassador Suryodipuro is a seasoned diplomat and a multilateral expert. He has been in Delhi since August 2017. Throughout his career, he has been involved in the UN matters, including as delegate to the UN Security Council. During Indonesia's 2 terms as elected member, 1995-96, hi Suhasini, and 2007-2008. He has been also keenly involved in regional affairs relating to ASEAN, the Pacific Rim, the Indian Ocean and Africa and Asia, and of course bilateral matters. Besides New Delhi, Ambassador Suryodipuro has served in Washington, D.C., New York, and Canberra. So, Ambassador, as I had mentioned to you, I will request you to kindly share with us the ASEAN perspective. Because everybody says, underlines and stresses the centrality of ASEAN group. Now, you have neighbor China. Each and every member of ASEAN, China is the largest trading partner. I think I read just 2-3 days back, the new Japanese foreign minister was visiting Vietnam and Jakarta. And he made the statement very clearly, he didn't want any action, this reason which can enhance tension. So you have your own perspective. People talk about the ASEAN NATO, I'm sure perhaps you are not one of those who support it, but let us listen to Ambassador Suryodipuro. Excellency, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Kumar. Good evening to everybody. Good evening to the distinguished panel. I see so many familiar faces. I'm almost tempted to address them one by one. However, I will refrain from doing that, but I hope I will have the opportunity to do that at a later time. Getting down to the point, first of all, a disclaimer, if you will, that I will not be speaking on behalf of ASEAN, but as a member, I hope my views would reasonably reflect the views of the region.
Okay, that's fine.
First of all, I'd like to convey perhaps three matters. First of all is I would characterize developments in our region as, first of all, it's increasingly dynamic relations among countries, in particular among the great powers. This is due to the relative rise and decline of relative comprehensive capabilities, be it in the outward pushing of security boundaries, or the more inward-looking behavior of countries in the sense of country-first approach to international relations. But one particular element that has been lately highlighted is that India is a key element to the Indo-Pacific architecture, be it in QUAD, in RCEP, and other architecture. It underlines that regional stability, prosperity requires an India that feels secure and confident about its economic ability to have win-win relations in the region. So in this sense, India is an indispensable country in the Indo-Pacific, and therefore it also has stake and responsibility towards the region's stability and prosperity. And finally, and this has been underlined by COVID-19, is the increasingly important and intertwined human security issues that require countries to cooperate. This kind of issues are not present. This is something new in the past 30, 40 years, perhaps. But nonetheless, it's there. It could be on pandemic, could be food security, energy security, water security, trade and financial linkages, and other matters that obviously countries would have to have greater cooperation across borders in order to address them. At the same time, these are also issues that have greater domestic constituents. So interactions among countries are not only important for peace, security, prosperity issues, but also on human security issues and domestic political purposes. Now on this, when it comes to ASEAN, on regional matters, ASEAN has been fully cognizant of the region. I think it's among the most sensitive towards regional development. You will recall that going back to 2005, ASEAN established the East Asia Summit together with partners in Japan, Korea, China, Australia, New Zealand, and India. I would even call this as a proto-Indo-Pacific. In 2010, the US and the Russian Federation was included into the East Asia Summit. In 2011, we adopted the Bali Principles to govern relations among states. And of late is the adoption of the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific. Now, this presumes centrality, ASEAN centrality. Now, to my mind, when we talk about ASEAN centrality, basically we are talking about three interlocking concepts. First is geographic centrality. This is the centrality of ASEAN geography to the regional and global security and prosperity. This is, if you like, a passive kind of centrality. And then institutional centrality and diplomatic centrality. So it is on the basis of the centrality that we build an architecture, but also we seek to undertake a more active diplomatic role. Diplomatic undertaking under the ASEAN Outlook of Indo-Pacific, we seek to address. So we built an architecture that is, first of all, recognizes that Indo-Pacific is a maritime region. It needs to address issues relating to the ocean, and we recognize that increasingly human activities have moved to the oceans, so oceans will become even more important for the security and prosperity of all countries, if not or most countries. The AOIP seeks to address economic and human security, and finally also to address connectivity. And this is basically to try to bring together the connectivity schemes or undertaking like BRI or quality infrastructure or Blue Dot network, how to bring them together. Now, how would it be into the future? How would this work out? Now, I don't have a crystal ball to look into it. But however, if we look to 25 years ago when APEC was first established in the early 90s, in a period of more than 25 years, APEC today, while it cannot solve underlying geopolitical issues, but it has established quite an impressive architecture. For example, it has more than 20 ministerial meetings today. It has more than 30 technical level mechanisms. It has established, in fact, sectoral community building. It provides kind of a ballast to the Asia Pacific rim. So my next point is what this requires is while ASEAN provides this inclusive platform and it has the wherewithal to help manage regional architecture, but in turn ASEAN, for its homework, it needs to strengthen its unity, needs to strengthen its community building, make it a more people-centric undertaking, needs to strengthen its institutions, including the ASEAN Secretariat. Within ASEAN, it is understood that unity and centrality has never been a foregone conclusion. It has always been a process. Within ASEAN, success has never been given. Success is when you look at the rear view mirror. It is never certain. Success is something you have to work on. And my final point, is that while we have some polarization in the region, but we also need to look at undertakings as layers of diplomacy, layers of undertakings. We have the ASEAN mechanisms, including ADMM+, East Asia Summit, ARF, and all the others. But there are also sub-regional undertakings, including such as the IMTGT, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand Growth Triangle, working with India to strengthen cooperation in the Bay of Bengal. QUAD is another one. It's a new one. it shows that ASEAN is not the only game in town, but there are other mechanisms as well, IORA, the US alliance system, and other. And I think we have to also think creatively. We have been hearing about QUAD Plus, and this is in the maritime region. Maybe we also need to start thinking about how to connect the continental and the maritime. So, for example, have a SEO Plus or an RIC Plus, because we cannot ultimately separate between what's happening on the continent and what's happening on the maritime region. And finally, another layer is on ASEAN-India. I think we have a lot of room to grow on ASEAN-India. We can work on strengthening the norms and institutions when it comes to maritime affairs. We need to strengthen connectivity. I think we have a lot more to do. We need to strengthen not only India, Southeast Asia on the continent, so for example, Ganga, Mekong subregions, but also strengthen India, ASEAN on the maritime region. It could be in the Bay of Bengal, and it could be in the wider region. Both India and ASEAN, we do not want to be trapped in a zero-sum geopolitical situation. We also want to strengthen economic cooperation. So we need to have a stronger, more substantive engagement between the two. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for giving insight in Indonesian perspective, ASEAN, and also throwing so many new sort of suggestions which we have to address creatively. Now I would like to request my friend Manoj Joshi, who will be appearing on the IAFA virtual for the second time. Now, everybody knows him, you see him on television, but still I would like to say a few words about him. Manoj, let me again remind in the beginning itself, every panelist has 10 minutes, so kindly stick to your time. A graduate from St. Stephen College, which has also produced the likes of Shashi Tharoor, MS IAS, Swapan Gupta, Chetan Bhagat. Manoj holds a degree of PhD from JNU. He is a distinguished fellow at the ORF. He has been a journalist, columnist, commentator for the last 20 years, specializing on national and international politics. He has written extensively on issues relating to Pakistan, China, Sri Lanka, and terrorism in Kashmir and Punjab. As a member of National Security Advisory Board, he was a member of the task force that proposed reforms in the security apparatus of the country. He has been the political editor of the Times of India, editor of Views, Hindustan Times, defense editor of India Today, and national affairs editor of Mail Today, and the Washington correspondent of the Financial Express and the special correspondent of the Hindu. He was academic fellow of the American Studies Research Center, Hyderabad. He has authored 2 books on Kashmir issues and several papers in professional journalism. He has been a visiting professor at the JNU, as well as visiting fellow at the Strategic and Defense Studies Center, Australian National University. So Manoj, as I had mentioned to you, kindly give us an Australian and Japanese perspective. Because as you know, they have been very vocal recently about Chinese assertion, but are aware of their limitations given the huge economic content and their relations with China. As you know, Japan has surplus with China to the tune of more than $441 billion 2019. And I think Australia has China as the largest trading partner, and China is Australia's largest importer of Australian wines. We have seen these initiatives. QUAD countries will be participating in Malabar exercises. Australia is joining after 13 years. In Indian papers are talking about is the snub to China. Whether it is or not, we don't know. But I'm sure the Japanese foreign minister who visited Vietnam in Indonesia, he was very careful about it when he was saying that he didn't want to see any action in the region which can enhance tension. Maybe he was addressing to the US rhetoric in recent weeks. So I don't want to say much. Manoj, floor to you, 10 minutes to your presentation.
Thank you, Ambassador. The only thing I can say at the outset is that you had set me a particular task, but I had already prepared a set of points that I was going to talk on.
Go ahead.
And I have had, and I know because your message had said that in case, so thank you very much for that. So, I think that, and as usual, I'll be presenting my views, which are very different from conventional views on the subject. Raja Mohan smiling, I noticed. But the point I'd like to make is that a bit of perspective is needed to understand the politics of geography. For a long time, this region was seen as the Asia-Pacific region, and it stopped at Southeast Asia. If you read all the old journals in the 70s and 80s, the Asia-Pacific stopped at Southeast Asia. But with the rise of China, the US has realized that Japan and Australia are simply not capable of up to the task of balancing China. Japan and Australia are just too small for that. So by expanding the region to include the Indian Ocean region, or at least half of it, as the US has done, China appears a bit smaller. So when it was Asia-Pacific, China loomed large. Now it's Indo-Pacific. Because of India's size, China is looking a bit smaller. Now, this is about balancing China. Let's be very clear. This is about balance of power. We should not get carried away that it's something about rules-based international order and all that kind of stuff. We have just recently seen how the Prime Minister of Mauritius criticized UK and USA and said that you are not listening to a UN law advisory on Diego Garcia. So, the UN arbitration in South China Sea, the US is very active. But when the UN ICJ gives a verdict on the Diego Garcia, they're not willing to listen. So my point is, it's not about the rule of international law and all that. It's about balance of power, which is frank enough, which should be there. Balancing China is an important goal. And there needs to be a subtle distinction between the QUAD, which is aiming to be a military entity, and the wider Indo-Pacific strategy. The rise of China challenges the liberal democratic outlook of India and other democratic countries. China's notion of multilateralism is selective, and its hierarchical notion of power distribution goes against the outlook of democratic countries like India. China's industrial policy, its military activities, signal its desire not just to equal, but to dominate everyone. The opacity of the BRI is, and its enormous scope and goals suggest that China is really seeking to establish a Pax Seneca, meaning their goal is nothing but less than Pax Seneca. To deal with this, we require a strategy, obviously, but the Chinese challenge is both military and political, and we need a differentiated strategy to deal with this. So on one hand, we have the QUAD, comprising of the 4 and maybe 6 countries. And then there is the larger potential coalition that is also there. If the QUAD assumes the NATO avatar, now people have been talking about QUAD as NATO, there is a problem for India. Because our primary maritime security interests are in the Western Indian Ocean. And the QUAD only takes care, that area is not covered by the QUAD. When I say Western Indian Ocean, I mean the entire Straits of Hormuz, Suez, and all that area. That's our real area of interest. Meaning that area is not covered by the QUAD or the Indo-Pacific strategies of the US, Japan, and Australia. As of now, I think that such a policy does not have the support of the grouping. The grouping that should be central to Indo-Pacific. And I think that has been brought out earlier by the ambassador from Ambassador Sidharto of Indonesia, which is the ASEAN grouping. None of the countries, not even Singapore, appear inclined to participate in any venture which seeks a military confrontation with China. Recently, it was revealed that Indonesia rejected a US request to permit its P-8 aircraft to use Indonesian bases. The June 2019 ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific self-consciously steered away from creating any new mechanism or replacing the existing one, aimed at underscoring the centrality of the ASEAN to any Indo-Pacific strategy. The outlook said that its declared goal is one of further strengthening and optimization of ASEAN-led mechanisms like ARF, ADMM plus, East Asia Summit, so on. So they said that remains our goal. But increasingly, it is becoming clear that issues relating to security of the region are no longer being taken by the ASEAN-led institutions. Till recently, we used to look at ADMM plus ASEAN plus East Asia Summit, etc. But now no one is looking at them. Now ASEAN is being pressed by China, and it's also not sure how it should react. Then, of course, there are countries like India, France, and more recently Germany, who also speak of the need of an Indo-Pacific strategy whose scope goes well beyond security. And I think when you say France and Germany, we may soon see an EU Indo-Pacific strategy. Both India and the EU have a common stake in certain areas: climate change, humanitarian aid, disaster relief, regulatory issues relating to trade, especially the digital domain, environment, observance of international law on maritime issues, and human rights. In this vision, there is a certain duality about the Indo-Pacific. It is a region of opportunity as well as a region of problems. The goal of the partnership of democratic countries is to enhance the former, is to enhance the opportunities and deal effectively with the latter, with the challenges. See, India partners US, Japan, Australia in the Western Pacific and Eastern Ocean region through the QUAD grouping. But everyone will agree that from the point of view of the Indo-Pacific, India's interests in the Western Indian Ocean are orders of magnitude greater. Meaning, as compared to what's there in the Western Indian Ocean, our interests in the Western Pacific are much smaller. And as I said, the QUAD doesn't come into the play. Now, no arrangement that ignores this reality can be useful for India. If you ignore the fact that our primary interest is in the Western Indian Ocean, the thing will not be useful for India. As for the QUAD now, it remains an aspirational entity. I'm not sure just why the US. See, US has been ignoring all alliances. And why the US is investing in this one. They are telling NATO and this thing, Japan, South Korea. But suddenly for QUAD, they say we want to do everything. I have not understood. The most recent ministerial failed to provide us with a joint vision of what the end game is going to be. Now, let there be no mistake. QUAD is not a gathering of equals. Given the asymmetry of power and purpose, it's the US which leads the QUAD. We have to be very clear on that. But India cannot be unmindful of the advantages we get. We get certain advantages from the QUAD. We can't ignore them. Especially intelligence sharing related to Chinese maritime movements in the Western Pacific and the Indian Ocean. This is a useful thing for us. So carefully calibrated policy aimed at serving our narrow military interests is in order here. As long as we can effectively combine it with a larger political Indo-Pacific strategy that takes up the larger issue of development, climate change, and all those issues. China, as I said, is a problem and an opportunity. Aspects of Chinese behavior are difficult, but the strength of the Chinese economy can be harnessed towards creating a peaceful and prosperous Indo-Pacific. Now, this requires an accommodation of legitimate Chinese interests, but drawing a line on its behavior, on its overweening behavior. We should desist from, here we should also avoid saying that China is a very big military power. It's not. It's totally dependent on Indian Ocean sea lanes for its security. 75% of its oil passed through the sea lanes. The US and Japan is overwhelmingly dominant in the Western Pacific. India plus US is overwhelmingly dominant in the Indian Ocean. China is not nowhere near here. But beyond the issue of alliances and organization, we need to understand that in many of the ways our hands are forced by our own predicament. For 20 years, we should have grown. But we find that the gap of the comprehensive national power between India and China has grown so wide that we are forced to look at this. We should have been creating our own, structuring our own policy. I have 15 seconds left, Ambassador.
Try to wind up.
Yeah. See, our weakness requires an external balancer, and therefore we have to go like the US. This is inevitable. I think this is an inevitable situation, but it's not a happy situation. I would much rather that India was capable of looking after its own defense and security requirements and being able to export military power, not only look after its own thing, but export military power beyond its periphery. And we have not been able to do that. At the end of the day, and I'm concluding here, what I'm trying to say is that our policy is being shaped by forces beyond our control. The hallmark of a great power is its ability to shape things rather than to be shaped by them. Given our failures, we have allowed this situation to arise. We must therefore make the best of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Manoj. You have given the mantra of how to shape the destiny of your own and others. Now I will turn to Suhasini Haidar. Everybody knows her. Everybody has seen her on television channels for ages, but it still sees appearing on our virtual discussion for the first time. Those who have participated in IAFA discussions in Habitat Center and also Nehru Memorial. A product of Lady Shriram College and a holder of master's degree in journalism for Boston College of Communication, USA, Suhasini has created a niche for herself amidst the cutthroat competition of the print and the electronic media of India. She cut her teeth as electronic broadcaster with the CNN in New York and worked with CNN International from 1995 to 2005. Regular reporting for India, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. She was the diplomat editor and prime-time presenter of CNN IBN for 9 years. Her immensely popular prime-time show, Worldview with Suhasini Haidar, made her a household name, at least in cities. She has been courageous in reporting from conflict zones in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Libya, Syria, and Lebanon. She was injured from bomb explosion while reporting from Kashmir. Her reports and comments are respected for her boldness and objectivity, though her detractors might object to this. In 2010, she won the News Television Best News Presenter Award. In 2015, she was honored with the prestigious Prem Bhatia Award for reporting and analyzing the bewildering variety of conflict and surges around the world. Her writing broadcasts have been consistent in their clarity in attempting to present a fair picture. She is currently the National Nuclear Affairs Editor of the Hindu. She writes frequently on India's foreign policy, international relations, and global security. So Suhasini, as I have been writing to you, I will request you to address the American and Chinese angle, because after they are the major player in this. And all the strident comment from US, especially on the eve of election, deserve to be taken with a lot of pinch of salt or more than pinch of salt. And I think you must have seen just only yesterday, Mike Esper has made remarks saying India is the most consequential country for the. So you have to take all these things. You heard other previous ones. I have already requested what to do, but you are free to say whatever you want to say. Go ahead.
Sure. Absolutely. And I should actually sort of compliment you on the timing of this discussion because, we've just concluded the Quad Foreign Ministers meeting. We look forward next week to the 2+2, where Mr. Pompeo has made no bones about what his mission is. His mission, whether it is to India for the 2+2 or to the other 3 countries, he's going to the Maldives, Sri Lanka, and Indonesia. The mission is to discuss ways to collaborate, to counter the challenge from what he calls the Chinese Communist Party. But of course, this is the American rhetoric. When they don't like a regime, they try to separate it from the country itself. And we've seen some of that being used with Iran as well. And we have US elections in 2 weeks. So we couldn't have this discussion at a more interesting time. So I'm going to put the timer on, and please do cut me if I go over time so that we can take more questions if possible. Look, the world today, and I'm trying to give a backdrop in terms of how the US-China relationship played into this Indo-Pacific strategy and how it plays into the Quad. The world today continues to be caught between the rise of China and a kind of quixotic retreat of the United States, retrenchment from world power. The truth is that you can call it the Thucydides trap. You can say this is about the inevitable conflict between one rising power and which is trying to dislodge an established power, or you can just look at it as two major economic powers in a tussle for control of world domination, world interest. The problem really is that they are not equal powers. The US clearly is the established power, China's clearly on the way up, and they are colliding, if you like, at this point. China's rise has been marked by its investment in the world, by the BRI, the revival of its economy despite the COVID crisis hitting them first. It is marked by the personal philosophies of President Xi Jinping, who has made a break from the past ideas of a peaceful rise for China, and given himself, in fact, a longer tenure in office than any of his predecessors since Mao Zedong have had. And it is marked by an all-round aggression, whether it is the military aggression, we're seeing that in the South China Sea, we're seeing that in the East China Sea, Senkaku Islands, we see it, of course, at the line of actual control. Or it is its maritime, pushing out in its maritime power. It's hard to believe that a decade ago, China didn't actually have an aircraft carrier. And today it's talking not just about its blue water navy, it is sending its ships around the world, setting up ports, setting up bases in various parts of the ocean. And finally, the diplomatic aggression. And of course, one sign of that diplomatic aggression was seen in Fiji just this week, where Chinese diplomats slugged it out with local officials over their recognition, slugged it out with the Taiwanese official who was being recognized there. So you've got this kind of levels of aggression coming there. And in the US, what is interesting is that its single-minded pursuit of China is actually in a complete, it's almost the outliner, it's the exception to otherwise retrenchment. So we're seeing the US pulling its troops out of Afghanistan, already pulling out of Iraq, talking about Syria as well. We're seeing the US get much tougher, more transactional on its alliance partners, whether it is Japan and South Korea, whether it is its NATO allies. We're seeing a retreat of leadership in terms of the multilateral sphere, whether it is the UN, UNESCO, WHO, Human Rights Council, pulling out of accords, Iran, as well as the Paris Climate Change Agreement. You might wonder why I'm running through all of these, because it is somewhere there explaining to all of us what powers or aspiring powers that are not the US and China are faced with today, which is essentially the need of the hour might be a multipolar world. It might be the rise of multilateralism. But in fact, we are all being forced to choose. We are all being pulled into these different polar opposites in opposing directions. And I would say that unfortunately, the Indo-Pacific, which is a much more grand long-term strategy, and the Quad is being pulled down into this as well. Since January 15th, I think, when the US and China announced a sort of mini trade deal, what we have seen is this, a cascading effect on relations, particularly after the coronavirus pandemic. A rise in the US-China trade war, which was supposed to have been solved in January, but clearly didn't, which could cost the world as much as $600 billion, according to one estimate. And clearly the world is being told to choose. If you choose to invest in Chinese manufacturing, you are clearly cutting ties with the United States today. If you choose to pull out, or if you choose to go with the United States' diktats on this, you are clearly cutting your relations with China as well. On 5G, we've seen threats coming from both Beijing and from Washington about what each country really should be doing. And then we see the rise of the Quad in this context between the two of them. Obviously, since it comes in this with this chronology, and it comes as a very, very dynamic rise, given that the Quad obviously started way back after the tsunami. It was, there were some meetings in 2006, 2007, then it went away, it came back in 2017. We haven't been quite sure what its common purpose is, because each time they meet, every time they meet, the 4 countries go away with separate joint statements. The 4 countries don't seem to agree on basic things. Now they do, of course, agree on the geography, because for a while, the US said the geography ended at India's west coast, whereas India said it ended at the African shores. We haven't seen them agree really when it comes to the most important things for India, which is in its region, an investment of money. Nobody seems to be wanting to cough up money for it. So there's been a lot of questions about what the Quad means. And suddenly we see in the last few months that the Quad has come to mean something. It seems to have everybody's backing. The announcement that Australia will in fact be part of the Malabar this year is as much a part of that. It is not surprising, therefore, that this is today being seen as an attempt by Beijing. It is being seen in Beijing as an attempt to curtail its power, and that is actually the driving force behind this particular alliance in the Indo-Pacific. Of course, it is not helped by Mr. Pompeo's statements in Tokyo. I think it was very clear that he was the only person to actually name China. He was the only person to say that I want the Quad to realize it has to come and collaborate against the Chinese Communist Party's coercions. Now, these aren't words that were uttered by Japan or Australia or India, but the US made it very clear, and because they were not pushed back in any way, and those comments were put out publicly, it almost seems as if they happen with the acquiescence of the others. So I agree with Dr. Joshi when he says that there is no point in saying that this is not a counter-China coalition, because that's what it's becoming. And that's what it's beginning to articulate itself as. It is also not helped by the fact that the US, Japan, and Australia are already part of a military alliance. So India's closeness to all 3 of those countries is just seen as India practically being a quasi-alliance partner. And as a result, I think that we are now at a stage which is a turning point. Well, as I said, the Indo-Pacific as a strategic vision, it's part of a much longer one. Every country has articulated its Indo-Pacific strategy separately. But I think we are at a turning point for the Quad. So I'm going to leave you with 3 or 4 questions about the timing right now for the Quad and what each of these things could mean. And then we can, of course, take up much more in the Q&A. So some of these turning point questions will be answered, I think, on November the 3rd. Others might take a while longer. And of course, on November the 3rd, if we don't have a real clear winner, we might not even have that. The first, the question of will it be Trump or Biden coming to power in the US? I think this is very important. Because Mr. Biden, with his experience in place, is likely, by all accounts, to dial down the rhetoric. Everybody understands that an anti-China platform is now a bipartisan policy in the US. But it is quite likely that the Democrats would dial down the rhetoric. And then the question would be, will Quad be the first casualty? Let's remember that way back in 2007, everybody blames India for being the hesitant power in all of this. But India was actually ready to go ahead. India hosted the Malabar. India was ready to go ahead with the Quad and have even a summit level of dialogue in Tokyo at the time, when actually it was Mr. Obama who conveyed that this was not a good time since he was trying to get China on board with the climate protocol. Australia was the one that pulled out of the Malabar, actually. It isn't that India kept Australia out of the Malabar at that time. So the question is whether you will see a Democrat administration maybe wavering when it comes to this grand Indo-Pacific strategy. After all, Mr. Trump only jumped onto the Indo-Pacific bandwagon maybe a couple of years ago. The second question, if Mr. Trump were to be reelected, would he keep up the rhetoric? Because obviously a lot of this rhetoric is related to his campaign. And the question of whether you can continue on this path when you have this US-China trade war, it's not really helping anyone. It's showing that the US trade deficit with China has actually grown. I think you might not see this level of rhetoric, in which case, again, Quad becomes a kind of first casualty, if you like. The second question, and I'm so glad you have the ambassador. I know I'm a little over. Just I'll get to 3 questions and finish there. Since Ambassador Suryodipuro has been on, I won't say much longer, but is it going to be the Quad anymore? Or is it going to be something bigger? Is Indonesia, is Vietnam, or other countries of the ASEAN going to be a part of these kind of negotiations? And if one of them does join, what does that mean actually for other balancing efforts, if you like, in the region? What does it mean for the RCEP? Because China is making it clear every time there is a Quad meeting that this is not something that they are just, passing by and saying, okay, fine, you can meet if you want. They are making it clear they see it as a counter-China strategy. And I think the third, most important to us for the Quad, is which way is this India-China standoff that has now lasted more than 6 months at the LAC? Which way is that going to go? Because it could go one of 3 ways. We could see a retreat by China from areas that they have occupied, maybe not likely, but certainly one way to go. The second would be status quo. What we're seeing right now is what we're going to get in the foreseeable future. That's not something that's going to go down very well in India. And the third is an out-and-out conflict. And I would say that each of those 3 outcomes is going to produce a different outcome for the Quad as well as for Indo-Pacific strategy in the future. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Suhasini. You have ruffled many feathers and given many suggestions. And these last 3 things, who knows what will happen? Even elections in US, who knows whether go to Supreme Court, and then we will see what happened during Al Gore and George Bush. Well, now we turn to the Guru of Gurus, Mahaguru, Professor Raja Mohan. He has been patiently listening, and I will give him floor. But before that, let me say, for the benefit of those who have missed some of things about him, now, he is currently the director of the Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore. He was earlier professor of South Asian Studies, Jawaharlal University. The Professor Mohan has been associated with most of the major Indian think tanks like CPR, ORF, IDSA, and he was the founding director of Carnegie India, New Delhi. Professor Raja Mohan was the Henry Kissinger Chair in International Affairs at the United States Library of Congress, Washington, from 2009 and 10. He served on India's National Security Advisory Board. He led the Indian chapter of POGWA's Conference on Science and World Affairs from 1999 to 2006. Professor Mohan is one of India's leading commentators on India's foreign policy. He writes a regular column for the Indian Express and was earlier the strategic affairs editor of the Hindu newspaper. Professor Mohan has a PhD in international relations. Among his recent books is Samudra Manthan and Sino-Indian Rivalry in Indo-Pacific and Modi's World, Expanding India's Sphere of Influence. But before I give floor to him, I want to turn to Amitabh Bachchan of Kaun Banega Crorepati and ask 2 questions about Professor Raja Mohan. In the attendees, do you know what the letter C sent the name of Professor Raja Mohan? Anybody knows? Okay, second question. You know, although he has done PhD in international relations, what was the subject of master's degree of Professor Raja Mohan? If he had pursued that subject, the history of South Asia would have changed. He did a master's in nuclear physics. And if we had pursued,
I can answer both questions. I said I can answer the first question.
Okay, let us not take more time. Professor Raja Mohan, you have heard all the 3 speakers. They have given several points to discuss further, provocative, non-provocative, depends how you look at. I want you to respond to whatever you want to respond to their points, and also give us more perspective. India, where do we stand? Because a lot of people think we are there, we are not there, we are like a very shy, coy, we want to be part, at the same time we want to retain our strategic autonomy. We talk about Saga, which Prime Minister has explained very clearly. This is a security and growth for all the reason. There is not complete convergence of what the US thinks about Indo-Pacific, what India thinks about Indo-Pacific. So, Professor Raja Mohan, a Guru of Gurus of Singapore, please enlighten us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kumar, for inviting me this evening. Good evening to all of you. It's really delighted to see so many friends. It's almost like being home in Delhi. So the Zoom, thanks to Zoom, I mean, you're all the time interacting with all the circuit that one is so familiar and engaged with over the last many years. A special pleasure to share this panel with Suhasini and Manoj and Ambassador Sidharto. So it's already, we've seen a lot of interesting and important things being said. What I'll do is really focus on India, my understanding of what is driving India. I'm not part of the government, or I've never been in the government. So it's my interpretation of what I think is happening at this point. One, I think I'll just say three sets of issues. The first, a word about geography, a word about the Quad, and the kind of issues that are, that are in play, and then looking at the uncertainties that exist in terms of India's own condition. So the first, on the question of geography, Indo-Pacific is not of interest to India, not just because Indo is put into the Pacific. This is not, geography, the names that we come up with are constructed. I mean, they kept changing. It is not as if Asia Pacific was set in stone. There was no word Asia Pacific till the late 90s. There was no real use of word East Asia quite late into the 80s. So it is a matter of circumstances, how the politics and economics of geography changes, about rising powers, about shifting economic weights. So what we see today when we talk about Indo-Pacific is really about the rise of China. And China, like so many great European powers in the past who came into the Indian Ocean, China is now coming into the Indian Ocean. If you just look at the map of the BRI, the Maritime Silk Road and the BRI, I mean, one on land, one on the sea, are really the two geographies that Ambassador Sidharto talked about. Eurasia, which is overland routes that China's rise is connecting, and the maritime side, which China is connecting its eastern coast with the Indian Ocean. So it is China's rising power that is compelling this integration in terms of how we think about geography. But is this new? Not really. To go back to the Second World War, the Indian Army was the one that was fighting the Japanese Imperial Army, pushing them out of Burma. It was Indian Army that took the surrender of the Japanese troops in Rangoon, in Singapore, in Jakarta, and in Hanoi. So where did that space come from? The space was the space in which the British India, that is the combination of Indian resources and the sole superpower of that time, Britain, dominated. So that time it was not called the Indo-Pacific. There was no Asia Pacific. There was China, there was Japan, there was further Indies, there was Indochina, there was Malaya, there was Burma, there was India. So the geography has changed, geographic names change, and I think Indo-Pacific, I think Manoj rightly said, represents a new configuration that has emerged. So I don't think we should, no need to quibble with the changing geography, because the structure of power is changing within the region. Second, I want to speak about the Quad. I mean, in fact, just one word about the Second World War. The British, if you talk about, there was something called the BCI at the time, the theater, the Burma, China, India theater. In that theater, the Indian Army, British Indian Army, backed by Americans, including General Stilwell, who built the road into China, was helping nationalist China to fight the Japanese aggression. That is Japan, India, Britain, the United States. The cast of characters has not really changed. The regimes might have changed. The internal distribution of power might have changed. That today, when you think of Bay of Bengal or the BCI theater, was the key theater in Asia where the big battles were fought. And today, we are back in that same situation with a different set of actors in all these countries that are today trying to shape this region. Second, I think on the Quad, I fully agree with Manoj. This is a response to China. The Chinese power has produced fundamental imbalances in the region. And for India, it meant a shift in the way it looked at the world at the turn of the 1990s and how it looks at the world today. If you go back to 90s, when Manoj and we were in Washington, you had the American Assistant Secretary saying they don't recognize Kashmir's accession to India. She said it publicly, the Assistant Secretary of State. And the declared policy of the Clinton administration was to cap, roll back, and eliminate India's nuclear weapons. So there were two clear threats to India's security, and that India sought to limit that danger by drawing closer to the post-Soviet Russia and China, and they talk about a multipolar world. 30 years later for India, what has changed is that the Chinese rise has been so fast. Today, the threats to Indian security, its territorial integrity, and its position in the region come from a newly powerful China. So the question, the Quad, India's positive thinking about this Quad today is really a response to the kind of threats it faces today from China, which it did not. In the last 30 years, there was a relative stability in the relationship, and that's what has changed in the last decade. And that also helps us distinguish between what happened between 2004 tsunami to 2007, when the attempt to construct the Quad failed because China seemed a reasonable actor. Since 2008, Chinese assertiveness has pushed everyone to find ways of dealing with the challenge because it creates problems for everyone, for Japan, for Australia, for India, for Southeast Asia, for the United States. So the Quad is really a response to the new condition where the recognition that Chinese power today poses a problem, therefore we need to find new answers because all the old answers don't work. So there are four themes that are emerged in the Quad today. One is the security. We've seen that happen, expanding economic security cooperation bilaterally, trilaterally between the four Quad members and their other partners. It is no longer just about security. And one of the things that we've seen happen, especially since the pandemic, is the economic dimension of Quad. And that's where we're talking about a Quad Plus. That is using the Quad framework to draw other countries in, to talk about resilient supply chains, to be able to deal with potentially China's gaming of the global trading order. We've seen some of that on the economic side. We're also seeing the extension to the technological side, where you have actually, whether it is a 5G or today artificial intelligence, you've seen the creation of new alliances to deal with the China's emerging dominance of the tech sector. And then finally, the institutional question. What kind of institution do you construct for the Quad? My sense is the Quad is a recognition that the other institutions have not been sufficient, whether it is the old bilateral alliances, whether it is ASEAN, the East Asia Summit, and therefore that the attempt to draw India into this structure in a different framework is the essence of the Quad. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to discard the East Asia Summit, we're going to discard ASEAN, or we're going to discard any of that. What it does is it produces a new framework that would work in parallel and in tandem with existing institutions. But the question then, it is how much the four countries are willing to do on all the three fronts. That brings me to the question of uncertainties in India's position. That if you saw through the UPA period and probably even through the first term of the Modi government, there was a reluctance to go fully down this road of embracing Quad out of the Indo-Pacific. That did not happen till 2018. The embrace of the Indo-Pacific concept and the Quad is really fairly more recent. But I think as India began to face the consequences of China's rise, then I think we've seen the domestic consensus in India move steadily, and since April, more radically towards that the hesitations, if you want to call it the historic hesitations of seen as explicitly balancing against China, those hesitations have dropped because internal consensus has moved rapidly to the urgency, the immediacy, and the inevitability of India's need to balance China that has emerged. Are there external uncertainties? Yes, of course there are external uncertainties. Suhasini talked about some of those. US and China relationship can change after the elections. The Chinese could change their strategy. The Americans could change their strategy. And then you have China, India. There I would think I see much less hope for fundamental changes in the logjam that we today find ourselves in. So I think when India does more things with the Quad, it is not going to, say, look, Quad or death. India, no country can do that. So while it invests in Quad, India is also trying a whole lot of other things that include minilateralism. We're trying to do something with the French and in the Western Indian Ocean. We're trying to do something with French and Australians. We're trying to do something with Indonesia, Australia, and India. So the multiple minilateral institutions are going to work. Depends on how much bandwidth we have to engage with all these issues. But I think in the end, that the power imbalance between India and China today is so large, and the Chinese claims on Indian territory, its eagerness to establish its primacy in India's backyard. I mean, there's nothing wrong with those ambitions. That's a reality. But then the question is, what does India do with those ambitions? Because after all, China has had claims, which is trying to redeem today because it has the power to redeem those. So I think India's karma, if you will, is now how does it balance China? And that problem is not dependent only on the Americans or the Quad. That if Americans and Chinese were getting along happily in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, that didn't stop India from doing what it has to. So therefore, irrespective of what others do, India will have to find ways of balancing Chinese power, because without that, its ability to secure its own frontiers or the waters in the southern seas are going to be difficult. There is no other option for India, I think. It cannot simply say, let's cede Chinese claims in the Himalayas. Let's concede China's position in South Asia and the Indian Ocean. I think I don't see that being a possibility, unless, of course, India is comprehensively defeated in a war. We're not there yet. So that, since that option is not there, for India, I think there is no choice but to stand up, either on its own, with or without the Americans. Just as in the past, Russia was a partner in balancing China. Today, it might not be. Today, America might be. Tomorrow, it might not be. But I think for India, if it wants to secure its interests, it will have to find ways to balance China. And I think that karma is going to be rather hard to get out of. Ambassador Kumar, I'll stop here.
Thank you, Professor Raja Mohan. You have addressed so many points. All the friends, please give a virtual round of applause to all our friends here. We will have about 15-minute Q&A, though we will spill over the time, but we can really afford to. And I see among the attendees, the most senior of us is Ambassador Eric Gonsalves is still there. Sir, are you there? Ambassador Gonsalves, are you there? Maybe he has left. Anyway, let me ask the first question, Professor Raja Mohan. In your book, Samudra Manthan, you talked about Samudra Manthan. Will we ever see the mythical urn of nectar out of the Samudra Manthan, or we will go on inhaling all the toxic air from this Samudra Manthan?
Right now, it's all poison, halal, so some distance away from Amrit.
Secondly, your second book talks about Modi's world. You talk about expanding influence of India. But if you, maybe it is true about Africa. Maybe in Gulf countries we have done better. Maybe in even, let's say, Asian countries. But if you want to really talk about neighborhood, whether it's China, whether Pakistan, whether Nepal, I don't think our influence is growing. We are being challenged every day. So do you really see our influence is expanding, or our influence is really slipping away, as yesterday in Times of India, the Anita Jaisingh has written? Professor Raja Mohan.
I don't think India's influence is slipping away. I mean, that India too has risen. I mean, not to the same degree or the same speed as China. India's relative capabilities have improved. Its economy is much bigger than it was 30 years ago. It has more resources to devote for diplomacy, for economic engagement, for military engagement. All that is true. But the fact is, you have a powerful neighbor on your doorstep, which you did not have before. So that is the new condition. So there will be more competition. it doesn't mean India is going to simply roll over and disappear. That I think, and that's where both India's own expansion as well as its partnerships, to put it bluntly, today India is more open for partnerships with the West, and that partnerships with the Western powers, as well as India's own traditional investments in the global South, do give it options. The question is, how much can we translate in the face of a very strong power on our doorstep, which we never had. In fact, if you go back to the 19th century, the British India was the strongest power, which kind of extended its influence into Tibet, in Xinjiang, in Yunnan. Today, rising China is the direction of radiation of power has changed, and that's going to be a fact of life. And I think we'll have to keep dealing with it. So I don't think the story has just begun. I don't think the story is over. It's just begun.
Okay, I see the hand from Dr. Sarvajit. Please go ahead. You asked your question. Dr. Sarvajit? I think he left.
Yeah,
Please
Professor.
Yes.
Yeah, can I ask a question? Yeah. Rajamohanji, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, sir. This time in the US presidential election, China is a major issue. So do you think they have attained the power of such influence that they can change president, they can influence president's candidate?
No.
This question is addressed to whom? Whom do you want this question to be answered?
Professor Rajamohan.
Okay.
I think everyone can address this. I think Suhasini too raised these issues. US has become like India. I don't think if anybody outsiders think they can just influence the kind of turbulence that is out there, it's completely mistaken. I think there are divisions within the US about China. I mean, I think those divisions are out there to see on trade policy, on security policy, and on climate change. Trump doesn't think there is climate change. So the Democrats think that is the most important issue the world faces. So there are differences within, and I think that will be an uncertainty. It's not that China has influenced Chinese-American domestic politics, but it is 40 years of economic engagement has created interest groups in the United States, which have a stake in a positive relationship with China. Now, the security establishment is saying, look, we can't keep doing this. We need to recalibrate the policy. So that is the tension that's being played out. And I think as the new administration comes in, we will see a lot of internal debates, a lot of contestation, a lot of jockeying. That will be, no new administration settles in 6 months. This could take much longer. So I would defer to Suhasini and Manoj, who's an American expert, to see how this US.
Okay, Suhasini, you want to add?
Not really, because, while we are surprised by things now happening, we are surprised that China is this issue in the US elections. The fact is that politics as usual doesn't exist anymore. Maybe what we are seeing is a little bit more of what we have seen in our subcontinent, which is the moment, you go towards an election, these things are raked up and then they're forgotten just after. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but it does not any longer surprise me that Mr. Trump, for example, would go on about China with Mr. Biden, and now of course he's on the back foot because it turns out he had a bank account in China, which a lot of businessmen did. But the fact that that's coming out has become another poll issue. I think all that's happening is there's a real democratization of democracy, if you like. We're all running similar kind of elections, and even at the beginning when I said that the world is grappling with these two basic themes, the rise of China and this retrenchment of the United States from all the other places where it could be bringing the world together. The third phenomenon is really the rise of alpha men. And not the rise of alpha men just in authoritarian countries like Russia or China, single party systems and all the rest, but the rise of alpha men in democracies. And I think that's what you're seeing the outcomes of.
Okay, Manoj, you want to add anything?
I'll just make one point that there are, and I'm talking as a person who has done my PhD on the United States 19th century history. The United States society has a lot of problems, meaning there are a lot of fissures in that society. there are a lot of things which have been papered over, but now many of those fissures are emerging. And what is happening is that social media is playing a role in that, just as it is playing in India, it is creating extremes in certain places. It has introduced a certain amount of toxicity. Now, what is happening is covert campaigns, covert activity by, let's say, Russians or Iranians or Chinese. They can do some mischief there, but I don't think they can basically, given the basic election, they can shift. But I think they can do a lot of mischief and create, deepen the fissures already existing in the US.
Okay. Now I see the hand from the war veteran, Major General Ramesh Chopra. Please go ahead. Your audio is, please switch on the audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All the panelists have talked about forums in the Indo-Pacific, highlighting Quad, in fact, even Quad Plus. And as far as I'm concerned, whether it's Trump or Biden or anybody else, we will remain members of the Quad because the balancing, besides what's happening in Eastern Ladakh, where we've held China very well, we need a forum to help us. I would request the Indonesian ambassador for his comments. One, how do you look at this encouragement to other countries, Korea, New Zealand, Vietnam, joining Vietnam particularly? Number two, if invited, would Indonesia join? Because in my view, it is pointless having Quad in the Indian Ocean with Indonesia straddling the Indian Ocean and not being a part of it, because as far as you're concerned, centrality of ASEAN is maintained. You are a democracy, and there are many more aspects to Quad rather than just security. And incidentally, in my view, it is a security architecture undeclared. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Ambassador Sidharto, please go ahead.
Well, on the second question about would Indonesia join, first of all, we are not privy to what discussion takes place within the Quad. So I cannot really comment other than what I read in open media. But to our mind, we know we are quite cognizant that ASEAN mechanism is not the only game in town, as I said earlier. But we have layers of diplomacy. Now, out of all of these layers of diplomacy, what ASEAN provides, for example, through ADMM Plus or the East Asia Summit or ARF, is an inclusive platform. Everybody's on the table. Everybody's invited to contribute. We had a lot of discussion in this panel about balance of power. But to my mind, it is not only about balance of power, but norms and institutions. I have not heard any country talking against norms and institutions. In fact, to my mind, everybody is interested to have some regulations, but they have to manage, find ways to manage their differences. So this is what where ASEAN can be useful. No doubt it has its limitations. No doubt that it has its work set out for it internally in strengthening its unity, and outwardly to strengthen that centrality role. When it comes to Quad Plus, we are not part of that, but we have a strong dialogue relationship with India, Indonesia, Australia. At the foreign ministers level, it has been agreed to have a dialogue building on this trilateral relationship that is, I think, almost a decade old, beginning as a 1.5 track, continuing to senior officials level. It's a matter of establishing the agenda and a time frame. So that would be my comment to General Chopra's question.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. I see my friend from Iceland is still there. Please go ahead, enlighten your view from Europe, sitting so far from here. What do you think of what we have been talking about?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with amongst so many friends. I see 10 of my very best friends from Delhi in front of me. And well, I'm inspired by many things that have been said, but I want to link it to what Manoj was saying in the very beginning about international law in regard for that, and then come back to what Suhasini was saying about unpredictability alliances. And you've all mentioned this, Manoj, Raja. And I think that's the problem that we're facing now. And I wonder if we still face that problem in 6 months. It's been a very unpredictable time for alliances. In my profession, we speak of pacta sunt servanda, and we don't see that happening with one of the leading countries in the world. Therefore, it's very hard to predict what the future will bring. I certainly think, India has benefited from the existing regime in the USA. There's been a lot more attention to India, and not directly, but indirectly. And I would like to see that continue in 6 months' time, either under the present regime or another. I think that's the most important takeaway I have from your comments. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you. I have time just for one question, and I see the face of my friend, Major General Ashok Mehta. I am giving you the last word. Please go ahead, ask a question, make comment. General Ashok Mehta. I see you are there. Please press your audio. Yes.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for noticing me in spite of my new look. My question is, should the Malabar series of exercises be interpreted as the militarization of QUAD? And if that is the case, then what happens when India has to make a choice in relation to its strategic autonomy? Because India is not going to be part of any military alliance. So the dilemma for India, as the foreign minister has been saying for a long time, that India has to make choices. India has to take risks. Now, while taking risks, will it be prepared to abandon its very, very coveted strategic autonomy?
Professor Rajamohan, you are the best person to answer.
No, I think, look, this strategic autonomy argument has always been a red herring, as if that is, countries respond to the circumstances they find themselves in. But, we've constructed as if strategic autonomy is some kind of a unique Indian virtue. Maldives has shown you what is strategic autonomy. They're trying strategic autonomy from India, or Nepal has shown you they can get strategic autonomy from you. So countries pursue their interests. So just like birds fly, fish swim, all countries try to maximize within their capabilities of what they can get. All countries make partnerships, don't want to give too much to the other partner, but at the same time want to get the maximum from the other partner. That is the 101 of international politics. But I think we've elevated in our discourse as somehow this demon is sitting on our back. Every morning we have to ask ourselves, are we today strategically autonomous? I think it's really of no help. And I think if India is facing threats, the Indian state will respond to those threats. And as I said, domestically, the China threat argument, which was they deeply divided the elite, and in the last 2 years ago, the divisions have ended. That there is greater trust of the United States today than there was there 4 years ago. So I think the structure has changed, and I think India will, just because you do one exercise with the Americans in the Quad form, India is going to cede its autonomy. It's going to cede its independence. This is what we said about the nuclear deal. Oh my God, the nuclear deal will kill India's foreign policy. Have we bought a single American reactor so far? Zilch. All the reactors we bought are from the Russians. So I think you elevate this somehow, this textual, philosophical constraint that should every day stop us from doing things which are in our interests. And I think the die has been cast there. I think the government has moved beyond those debates. Good or bad, you could argue that. But I think today you face the real and present Chinese danger, and I think countries are responding to that.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all my eminent panelists. I can see hands from my friends, but I have already exceeded 15 minutes in the whole. I never exceeded any program, but thank you very much. I think we have discussed this issue from different angles, different perspective, and discussion will continue. As Professor Rajamohan says, I'm sure all discussions are in evolving form, and so many ifs and buts in coming days. International arena, things change so fast, nobody can predict. Once again, thank you so much for taking your time out to be part of discussion. It has been worth it. Thank you and have a nice evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Raja, bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night, Manoj. Good night, Ambassador. Good night.
Thank you, Excellency.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Excellency. So nice.